I went to the Grenfell walk last night as well, and I've been every year that we could, other than the COVID year, and I just wanted to also send solidarity to that community, and also to thank all the officers and staff who are both on the front line and behind the scenes, working so hard for our community. Every year that I've walked, I've felt the mournful atmosphere that there are at those marches. Last night, though, in particular, I felt there was a palpable betrayal, and particularly a government that have widened inequality and injustice, and it seems to be getting worse, not better. And the deportation of refugees to Rwanda, the failed one last night, is a different subject, but it's, again, the same racial injustice, which is about deregulation and not listening and ignoring the voices of black and brown people. Now, to get to my question, the government is saying there's a compelling case for reform of fire and rescue services. I'm deeply suspicious of that because of the deregulation that I've just been talking about. What's your opinion, Mr. Commissioner?
Genuinely, I welcome it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the Commissioner. I'm saying it because I stood in front of that tower block 5 years ago and looked at how the erosion of what I saw as professional standards and the national frameworks that supported those standards over probably a 20-year period, the lack of inspection had led to the need for reform. So I'm pretty objective about it because I saw it as letting down hugely courageous public servants, that lack of investment in both the National Fire Service and the London Fire Brigade. So I welcome it. I think actually, whilst there'll be elements within that white paper that are contentious for some, depending on what part of the country you're in, the kind of governance regimes you have locally, so there's some difficult questions of governance. Whilst there is a question within it around pay and the national frameworks around pay that would drive some controversy, if you set those two issues aside, which there will be rightful debate on and a wide range of opinions, the rest of it is focused on professional standards. It is about making the sector more regulated, more professional. It's about supporting firefighters with better training, a National College of Fire, recognising their importance within communities by getting them to swear an oath, putting a code of ethics on the sector, which I see as a mark of respect, actually, rather than a burden, because similar ones exist in health and policing and the military. You know, I took an oath myself as a soldier. I'm entirely surprised I didn't take one as a firefighter, because I think it drives both individual responsibility and is a sign of the importance firefighters hold in their communities. So I would say I broadly welcome it. It's broad brush at the moment. We'll need to understand the detail. It's in consultation. We will reply to that consultation in detail. What I would always say to colleagues in government is that if you want real change, though, you have to invest. Yes, we have to find efficiencies. We've talked about on this committee many times, you know, we have our own responsibilities there and we need to do better. But if you're talking about big hitting change nationally, like a National College of Fire, and the kind of drive towards professionalism that I think colleagues in central government want, you have to invest. So I think my other caveat on the paper is I want to see what that level of investment is, because it has to match the ambition.
Deputy Mayor.
I'm going to agree with the Commissioner. I think that fire tends to be quite a Cinderella emergency service in a lot of ways. It comes quite low down the list of sectors that sort of are subject to government reform. We've been waiting. I think I'm, as some of you know, I'm sort of involved in the LGA work on fire. We've been expecting the fire reform. It's been promised by Stephen Greenhalgh for well over a year, and I think it's not. It's really welcome that they've actually looked at what some of the key issues were with the response at Grenfell, and actually sort of recognised that part of that was about recognising the need for professionalism and leadership within the sector. So there's a thread running through from the fire through to the white paper on fire reform that recognises that if you think that one of the biggest issues was incident command and incident command training, then actually, if it is done correctly, and I would caveat that this all has to be properly resourced, as the Commissioner said, and done correctly, a College of Fire gives the sector a status that it currently doesn't have. And actually, the sector having an inspectorate gives it a status that it didn't have while there wasn't an inspectorate, and actually potentially led to some of the issues around the fact that things had changed after Lacanau then slipped. So that's the sort of thing that an inspectorate could have dealt with. So I think the inspectorate coming in, a College of Fire coming in, a focus on leadership, professionalism, and so forth is really, really welcome. Some issues, I think, I'd be keen to make sure that the openness the white paper in its current form has to local determination on governance. I think that's something that we clearly had cross-party agreement. Those of you who were around when we were having the to and fro with LFIPA, where you had the anomaly where you had a mayor of one party and a fire authority that had a majority of opposition members on. It was an absolute nightmare for everyone concerned. It was an anomaly that with a mayoral system in place, we didn't have a direct link through in terms of the governance. I think it works. It works for us in London. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work everywhere. Although I do think that, by and large, having a single political sort of a person in place who has holds to account but is also then accountable, there's something quite powerful about that, and it works for London, as I said. So I think that, but resourcing matters. I think that I know that the minister's quite clear that the lack of a pay review body, he said this publicly, so I'm not sort of breaking any confidences, the lack of a pay review body for fire has potentially been one of the issues with firefighter pay falling behind. But the removal of the national collective bargaining mechanism that is in place needs to be well thought through if that's what's going to happen, because I think there's some dispute between people who are involved in the National Joint Council and the Inspectorate and Government on the role that the NJC played in the collective agreement around the COVID response. I felt it did play a really positive role in that, and I wouldn't want to lose that if we went to national pay negotiation. But I think if the review is done correctly and everybody feels that their views are heard, we could potentially come up with something that works better for everyone. But am I clear that actually having no reform for an entire sector for a significant length of time means that a sector potentially falls behind in terms of its sort of status and professionalism? Yeah, I think it's broadly really welcome, an awful lot in the fire reform white paper. That's not to say that what comes out the other end, I won't have any issues with any of it, and we'll be making sure that over coming weeks we put in a full response. And I think I'd be very keen to have further discussions with members collectively or individually about what the changes might mean for London. But the focus on professionalism is actually really exciting, because one of the discussions we regularly have is about succession planning, about sort of the fact that we've got a large number of chief fire officers who are approaching retirement, not necessarily got the pipeline coming through. Focusing on professionalism, giving people that status and the support they need to succeed as corporate leaders as well as operational leaders, should make a massive difference to the sector. So always want to make sure we see the detail, but overall welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you both. I understand you're saying you're welcoming it as long as it's done correctly, and I appreciate ongoing dialogue about that, because with this government I'm not so hopeful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. I won't bring politics into this because it's not necessary.